cycle, represented by 36. And when you put them together, you have 72. That's why they have 72 followers in the Queen of Ethiopia. So they had this big party for Osiris when he came back from teaching people all around the world the rules of Ma'at and how to do fire and build buildings and windows and things of that sort. They had this big party, and Isis was there, and there were others. And then said, well, why don't y'all, whoever gets in the coffin will get a surprise, a gift. So everyone tried to get in the coffin and see whether they could fit so they could get the gift. A set got in, and other people at the party got in, Isis got in, but no one could fit. Either the coffin was too wide at the shoulder, too narrow, too long, or too short, and so no one could fit. And then Osiris said he'll try, and he got in the coffin. And when he got in, Typhoon, which is the spirit of the unseen world, spiritual world, closed the lid. And they closed the lid, and Typhoon and others took the coffin out to the river and threw the coffin in the river. That's where you get the Moses story from. And they murdered him on the 17th day, which is controlled by Hathor. Remember I showed you the cow god Hathor, which is fertility, rebirth, and regeneration, the cow god. They murdered him on the 17th day, on the 28th year of the rule of the king, which 28 represents the lunar cycle, female cycle, meaning rebirth and regeneration. They murdered him in that particular year so he could not be reborn again. So Isis and Nephthys and Ma'at and Anubis, they went looking for Osiris because they heard he was thrown in the river, because they surrounded the coffin, and they closed the lid so no one could get to it to rescue him, and they threw his coffin in the river. And some children noticed that saw them throw it in the river, and Isis, she was of course very sad about the whole thing, and she started crying and singing what people call today the blues, and she cut off her hair. But nonetheless, she met these children. The children said, we saw the coffin thrown in the water, in the river. And the coffin landed, what we call today, landed by Syria. And the king went hunting one day, and he went hunting for what we call geese, birds. And he noticed this coffin in the woods. He could just smell it. But what had happened was a tree grew up around the coffin, so the coffin was inside of the tree. But it gave us such a lovely fragrance that the king said he wanted that tree. So he had the tree cut down, and he built columns around his palace with it. And Isis heard people talking about it, and they told her that that was the spot over there where the tree was. So she went to that spot, and she started singing there. And she was very upset at what happened to her husband, Osiris. So she heard that a king came and took this tree and had it cut up and made into a column. So she went to the king's palace, and she became a babysitter for the king, basically. And she babysitted the king's son. And she would have the king suck on her finger, the baby suck on her finger at night, and the finger represents the fin of the fish. The fish represents immortality. She was trying to give the child immortality, so she made a little fire, which means a representation of the sun god, the fire, the sun god. So she made a fire and put the child in the center of it. The child wasn't getting burnt or anything. She put the child in the center. And she would go away and fly around the column where her husband's coffin was inside of this column. There used to be a tree that they cut down and made into a column and put on the building, and the coffin was still inside. But she would go around the column and sing to her husband a lament, as we call it, which is basically a blues. But one night she went away to sing around the column where her husband was, Osiris, and the queen came and saw her baby in the fire and said that Isis was crazy and took the baby out. And when she did that, Isis said, now you have deprived the baby of immortality, because one more day the baby would have had immortality, but her taking the baby out of the fire, the baby would now die. This story goes on to say that anyway, Isis told the king actually what had happened. So the king said, well, I'll give you the column. So he gave Isis the column, and she split it open and took the coffin out and took the coffin back to Egypt. And she went to a swamp, forest, into the swamp, what we call a papyrus swamp. And she had the coffin there, and she would breathe into Osiris's mouth, and she'd flap her wings, turn into a bird again, and flap her wings, and let the sun reflect off of her to give Osiris back life. Meanwhile, she had what we call the immaculate conception. She had sex with Osiris spirit and had a baby who we call Heru, which we call Immaculate Conception. But see, Set was still mad about the whole thing, and he heard rumors about it, so he went around looking for Osiris. He changed himself into a pig looking for Osiris. But one time he went hunting for gazelles by the moonlight, and he spotted Osiris and Isis. And he went over to Osiris and felt that there was a pulse in his arm that he may be coming back alive. So he cut him up in 14 pieces, which is half of a lunar cycle, which is half of the female cycle, which we call the midnight sun. He cut him up in 14 pieces and threw the pieces all over the place. And wherever the pieces were, a temple was built. Isis went about gathering these pieces back together to put her husband back together. But when he cut up Osiris, what happened was beauty and harmony left the earth, and crops wouldn't grow, and people got divorces, and there were wars everywhere, and people that were fighting, that normally didn't fight, were fighting, until she put back the pieces of Osiris so he could get rebirth. But she missed one piece. She missed what we call the phallus, which is the penis, physically called the penis, the symbol of rebirth and regeneration in African culture. She didn't get that piece back. That piece was swallowed by a fish and taken out to the ocean. So since she didn't get that piece back of Osiris, Osiris was named given the title of the Lord of Darkness, the Lord of the unseen world, and he was in charge of whether a person could be reborn again. After you die, you can be reborn again with God, but he was given that responsibility and called the Lord of Darkness. So we have these rituals that take place in Egypt where the king, the pharaoh, and the citizens go through this whole ritual of rebirth and regeneration. It's like a play, and they present these challenges to the person. These challenges to challenge the darkness to see whether you can get back your rebirth and regeneration. That's where you get the giants and the giant and the beanstalk and all these marches to challenge the person so they can win back their right to be born again. But in any case, the water represents forgetfulness. That's why the coffin was thrown into the water, forgetfulness of the amniotic fluid. So Osiris was killed by his brother Set, and his son Heru, or Horus, as I mentioned before, Isis and Osiris had a child, and his name was Heru, and he was told to revenge his father being killed by his brother Set. So he had fights with Osiris, fights with Set about killing his father, and sometimes he would win, sometimes he would lose, and they just fought continuously. And one time he asked his mother to help him out, Isis, and his mother helped him out, and he was able to tie up Set. He was getting ready to tie him up and kill him, but Isis felt sorry for her brother Set and let him go. And Set just plucked out her eye for that. And Horus, he got angry with her and cut off her head. But that's symbolic of trying not to give her rebirth and regeneration. So in any case, they fought and they fought and they fought. And one time, the gods were asked to settle this argument. So Horus had a letter from his father, Isis, Osiris, to present to these gods to say that he was a rightful heir to the throne, to be in charge, and not Set. But Set said Horus was too young and he shouldn't be in charge, and he doesn't lack the understanding or the maturity to be in charge of a whole nation of people. And the god said, "You're right, Set." And we're getting ready to give the title to Set to be in charge. But Osiris wrote another letter, and he said, "If you guys do not follow Ma'at, you will all go in the underworld and never be reborn again. You will all be eaten by demons." So the gods had to follow the rules, just like man has to follow the rules. And they said, "Okay, we will give the title to Heru." And so Heru became the god of the seen world, the god of the earth, and Set was given the title of the god of the lesser god of the underworld, which the Europeans call heaven and hell. And that story is basically the foundation for all of these myths that we're going to go over. So it's important to understand that and have some kind of perspective, because once you see that, it becomes clear what is going on in this print, where you have the Pharaoh's daughter rescues Moses from the Nile, and we see that the child has been put in the water, which is Osiris thrown into the water. This is the same story, but the names are changed. The word Moses means child. Child thrown in the water. But when we get into another culture, we're going to run into some problems here, particularly with the symbolism, because wells represent not only, this is the well, Christ and the Samaritan woman at the well. This is European woodcut. I'm going back to the original artwork that the Europeans used in their myths and stories. This well represents the vagina as well as the penis, and the water coming up represents ejaculation. You see, she's pouring the semen, the fluid of regeneration, into a bucket here. And she's going to use the semen to regenerate herself. These are the symbols embedded in that story there. And the challenges I mentioned, how you have to go through these challenges to have the right to be reborn again in life.